Within the U.S., there's a growing trend of more and more gated communities. The reduced traffic in these communities attract buyers who are looking for a place that's safer and quieter than the community at large. There are fewer strangers in the neighborhood and higher standards for property maintenance. Shared amenities like pools, parks, recreation centers, and landscaping are a draw for the homeowner. And let's face it, gated communities are symbols of success or wealth. This morning's parable is about someone who was wealthy enough to live in a gated residence. We aren't told his name, but we know he was rich. And he made sure everyone knew he was rich by the way he dressed. He wore fine linen clothing that was dyed in purple, a color that only wealthy people could afford because of the labor-intensive process of creating the dye. So the man spent his days locked behind his gated residence, consuming massive amounts of food and running around in expensive clothes. And right outside his gate was a beggar named Lazarus. And although our text says Lazarus was laid at the gate, a more accurate translation would be thrown. Lazarus was thrown at the gate. He was covered in sores, which attracted the attention of the neighborhood dogs. And while the rich man spent his days gorging himself on expensive food, spilling it all over his expensive clothes inside his expensive gated home, Lazarus sat outside the gate, dreaming about dumpster diving in the rich man's trash bin for just a few morsels of food to take the edge off his hunger. And then they both died. And we learn in the course of the parable that they were separated by a chasm in the afterlife, which appears to be a metaphorical mirror reflection of the chasm that existed between them while they were both alive. And that's what I want to talk about today, that chasm. The chasm that separates so many of us from each other, what it looks like, and what it will take to bridge it. First, we need to acknowledge that there are certain people who are invisible to us, and we need to see them. Lazarus seems invisible to the rich man. Even after death, when the man looks across the chasm and sees Lazarus resting in the lap of Abraham, he only speaks to Father Abraham as if Lazarus weren't even there. He knows who Lazarus is because he uses Lazarus' name, but he only speaks to Father Abraham. Maybe he feels it's beneath his dignity to make a request of a person like Lazarus, since he's probably accustomed to speaking only to the person at the top. Or maybe he's too ashamed to speak to Lazarus because of the way he overlooked him in life. And maybe he couldn't bear to look at Lazarus in life because he was too overwhelmed by all of Lazarus' suffering to do anything. That may sound like a feeble excuse for his behavior, but it's a fact that the more we look at the suffering of others, the more impotent we feel to do anything about their pain and injustice. Despair and cynicism creep in, causing us to close our eyes to suffering and shut down our overloaded sympathies. But doing so reinforces the chasm that separates us from our neighbor. It padlocks the gate between us. Instead, Jesus calls us to look into the face of suffering. Yes, it can be overwhelming. So maybe we can start out by just seeing others instead of trying to save them. We can avail ourselves to more than just the headline of the casualties of a natural disaster by reading the distressing details of the whole article. We can look at the photographs and call the names out loud of the latest victims of gun violence. We can take a moment to imagine what it might feel like to be told you can't use the public restroom. The chasm won't ever be bridged until we see the suffering and brokenness of the person on the other side. Next, we identify the chasm and give it a name. For example, racism is the chasm that separates many of us from each other. It allows white folk to ignore the higher incarceration rate of black people compared to white people. Racism memorializes the death of a white person who was shot and excuses the all too common killing of a person of color. The chasm goes by many more names than racism, though. Sometimes it's transphobia or homophobia or anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or xenophobia. Sometimes it's classism or ageism or ableism or poverty or political ideologies. If we thought taking a long, hard look at the person on the other side of the chasm was difficult, it's nothing compared to acknowledging what's hiding within us that separates us from that person. But becoming aware of the suffering of others and becoming self-aware of why we have distanced ourselves from that suffering is not enough. Christ calls us to do something. Maybe joining others who have committed themselves to building a bridge across the chasm. In Peru, there's a suspension bridge that's 90 feet long, hanging across a 60-foot high chasm, and has done so for 500 years, dating back to the Inca Empire. And it's made entirely of grass. Obviously, a grass bridge doesn't last very long, so each year, 4 nearby tribes take part of its reconstruction using a method that's been handed down from generation to generation. First, the grass is collected about 2 feet in length. Then it's twisted into cords that are woven together to form a rope. The ropes are braided to form a cable about the size of an adult's upper arm, and the cables are strung across the chasm to form the base and handrails of the new bridge. Then the old bridge is cut down to be washed away by the river below, and the new bridge is finished off by weaving cords in and out of the cables to form the floor and sides of the bridge. The entire process takes only 3 days. A new bridge is created because people from different tribes have come together to work on a project that benefits them all. The bridges God calls us to build are not beyond our reach. They don't require wealth or power. They require compassion, courage, and the willingness to weave our lives together with the lives of others. Every act of seeing, every act of naming, every act of standing alongside someone the world is casting aside is a strand of grass in the bridge God is building through us. So let's not resign ourselves to the chasms of this world, but instead let us join Christ in the holy work of bridge building, so that together we may glimpse and even taste the kingdom where there are no gates, no chasms, but only one great table where all are fed and all are clothed in God's love. Amen.